Welcome on Texas Football. I'm Bobby Burton. Time for State of the Program, brought to you by our friend Adam Lowy and his group over at the Lowy Law Firm. Gerry Hamilton, CJ Vogel, thanks for joining me. We're going to talk a little Longhorn football. This is our weekly segment where we take a big picture look of Texas football. I'm here in Destin, Florida, where yesterday we heard Steve Sarkisian talk. We're going to talk a little bit about that. We're also going to talk about some things happening on the 40 acres. With the Texas Baseball Regional being hosted there. Women's College World Series starts tomorrow, as well as there's going to be an elite camp or a couple of camps for the Longhorns in football coming up, as well as, and this is where I want to start with you, CJ, it's time for all of those midterm guys or those year-end guys to show up on campus this weekend. So not only the Nick Townsend of the world, the high school player, as well as the Coleman brothers coming in, but all of those mid-year guys through the portal. Tell us a little bit about those guys and their plans for this week.
Yeah, of course, a lot has been made about Nick Townsend not being able to participate in spring football. We'll get the first look at the Dekaney prospect in summer conditioning, as well as the Coleman brothers. All three of them arriving in Austin the first week of June. But, Bobby, that also means everybody out of the portal that Texas was able to add in the spring now officially able to move on to campus as well. And look, I don't know if my first, welcoming to Austin, Texas is June 1st. Look, I don't know if I'm excited for that. If I'm one of these guys.
Is it 100? Is it 110? Is that what you're saying over there?
We've been battling lightning and storms, but it will be very hot. So welcome to Austin, Texas. Welcome to Texas weather in particular. But that's Emmett Mosley. That's Jack Injuries on the offensive side of the ball, as well as Matthew Caldwell, the new quarterback out of Troy. And then if you go down to the defensive line, Murad Watson, Levon Johnson, and Mason Shipley, the kicker out of Texas State, all now joining the Texas Longhorns, who, look, still one spot available on the roster sheet, but now you have the entire roster on campus together, ready to gel, move forward, and get prepared for that 2025 fall season.
CJ, you talk about those groups. No surprises to our knowledge other than the late ad from Matthew Caldwell. They'll get in. They'll start doing workouts with the team. The rest of the team will return too as well, right?
Yes, absolutely. That's going to be one of the big things is getting the guys back from going home. You kind of get that 3-4 week span off going home to relax. And of course, these guys are still working out with whether it be personal trainers, high school friends, college buddies that they live in the same vicinity, just making sure that they're staying in shape. Of course, I mentioned the summer heat's coming. This is not a time that you want to be behind, but Torrey Beckton sent every kid home with a pretty detailed workout regimen for that off season for that month of May. But coming back, arriving on campus, that's coming up this weekend.
CJ, one other thing I think is going to be interesting, you and Gerry. I bet that there are some football players out at the football stadium or out at the baseball stadium this weekend, rooting on Jonah Williams and the Longhorn baseball team as they host the regional alongside UTSA, the number 2 ranked team in that regional, Houston Christian, obviously, as well as that. So a lot of teams, Texas trying to take that home and then get to the super regional as well. All right, before we go to you, Gerry, I'm going to ask you about a question that I posed to Steve Sarkisian. I want to say thank you to Adam Lowy and the Lowy Law Firm. He and his group are sponsors of the State of the Program. If you've been injured in a car wreck, truck wreck, automobile accident of any kind, including an ATV or an 18-wheeler, anywhere in between, and think you might be due compensation, you or a loved one, make sure you give Adam and his group a call. They'll give you a free, no-strings-attached consultation to see whether you might be due compensation. Again, that's Adam Lowy over at the Lowy Law Firm, LowyLawFirm.com, 20-plus years in business now. All right, Gerry, I talked to Steve Sarkisian a little bit yesterday, along with some other reporters. I asked him about if there was a single position that surprised him. You and I talked about it this morning on Coffee and Football. He said that it was probably the linebacker position was in better hands than maybe he thought going into the spring. And he said it was depth and versatility for the reason.
Yeah, I mean, look, if you look at with Trey Moore playing, obviously some linebacker, I think he's more of a hybrid guy, right? But he worked at linebacker this spring. Texas has of the guys that returned to Texas, 16 sacks from the linebacker position. That is a massive number to have returning on your roster. Oh, by the way, Brad Spence brings in 4.5 or 5. So you're over 20 sacks at the linebacker position. Have we ever heard of that in Texas football history? Not like that in the pass rush group, right? And then there's the argument, well, what's Colin Simmons? The edge? Is he a linebacker? Oh, that people could argue about that all they want or discuss that. But let's talk about who are the linebackers. And we've been saying this on Coffee and Football. I thought it was going to be the most improved position in the program heading into next year. And it was multitude of reasons. Anthony Hill and Longhorns are juniors. They have a lot of experience now. Obviously, Ty Anthony Smith, a sophomore, got his feet wet yesterday. He's a stronger player. Trey Moore, that versatility to play that position. You bring in Brad Spence. And Sark even mentioned Bo Barnes, who we had heard had a really good spring, 6'1", 240 pounds, ran 10.96 in high school. If that's your sixth linebacker, Jonathan Cunningham's very talented, but he needs some time physically. If those are your six linebackers, Texas is in a better spot at the linebacker position than in my years doing this probably because and I'm not saying they're going to be as good, but CJ, I said this on Coffee and Football. This is the first year that Texas fans are going to look on the field and say, our linebackers physically look like what Georgia and Alabama's been playing with. This is the first year that they could say, I mean, Anthony Hill's 6'1", 240. Brad Spence is 6'2", 240. Trey Moore is in that area code. Leon Galafal's added some armor. Ty Anthony Smith. Bo Barnes is going to look really big out there on the field. Texas has big, versatile athletes at linebacker who can rush the passer. That's a dangerous combination for Texas this year and the opponent's Texas's plan.
CJ, your thoughts?
Yeah, I was talking about this a little bit earlier last night on the live stream. Is you look at who Texas might play, whether it be, a Mike Leach air raid kind of style, whether it be kind of a Michigan ground and pound type of style, and you have the linebackers that could fit every single type of opponent style. And I think that's something that Texas maybe didn't have a year ago, or really before then as well, because we're talking about the ramp up to where we are today. But it all starts with Anthony Hill, right? A guy that we expect to be in that All-American conversation, perhaps even the Butkus Award. I think we are all kind of in agreement. There should have been some sort of recognition from the Butkus for Hill this past year as well. But you talk about the big bodies. You could, kind of bang in the paint, if you will, with the 240-pound linebackers, or you can go light with a Leon Galafal, a Ty Anthony Smith as well, who has some safety experience from his high school days and really be able to play the pass game very well with Anthony Hill in that same package. So the versatility is tremendous. And then you talk about the talent, you talk about the production. It's deep and it's fun. So Texas fans should be very excited about what also this front seven could provide next year.
You mentioned Anthony Hill as the linchpin to this, and I agree with that. Taking it back to what Gerry was talking about from how good is this group compared to what they've been in the past, a historical perspective, so to speak. Anthony Hill coming in with Jalen Ford was a really good combo, but Hill at that time was still learning the position. And so they had David Ben. I thought the linebacker group was good last year, but it was still burgeoning because you had Hill and LaFau still learning on the job. I think this year, those guys, both starters coming back, I think to Jerry's point, I think that'll be really strong. But, Texas had a pair of linebackers that have been good before. Jordan Hicks and Emmanuel Acho together were good. What they haven't had is the depth at linebacker and the variety, which is what Steve Sarkisian was getting at. Look, we've got, and what both y'all mentioned, we've got, not only do we have starters that are starting, like we've got pieces that we can kind of maneuver around the board like chessboard, maneuver around the chessboard to create something. I mean, Texas back in the 70s, 80s, guys, by the way, even the 60s, considered linebacker U as much as any school in the country with the guys they had. But recently that has not been a strong position overall, really from the 2000s up. There have been spurts of a Rod McElroy, or I mentioned Jordan Hicks and those guys, Jalen Ford. But this is a different group, I think. And it is. I do believe that Anthony Hill, to y'all's point, is the linchpin and the guy that is the separator from this group, maybe from some others. But I also believe that the other separation is the variety that we see. All right, Gerry, I want to go to you next and talk a little bit about recruiting. This is the last week before the month of June, and June sets up a ton of official visits. I don't know I'm going to ask you what the total number is in a second, but there's that. And then there's also this elite camp that they have coming. They have a couple of young quarterbacks for 2027. So not even 2026, but a year ahead, up from the Shreveport area that are coming in. What's your take overall right now on recruiting as we set up for this month of June, which is what Sark and Brandon Harrison, those guys have kind of set up for their big month push?
Well, this is going to be the most talent Texas has ever had in an official visit season. And it's because of the numbers. It's just sheer numbers. I mean, I think we're at Jake Collette, the kicker from Georgia, is going to OV 6 through 8. Same with Trot Nixon, the long snapper, and the punter offer. They're all officially visiting. So that takes the number right now to 55. That's going to peel off a little. There'll be a few guys that commit elsewhere that Texas like, hey, we're not going to have spots, or those kids just may pick a different school. There's going to be a couple of guys like Tyler Atkinson and Derek Cooper that we still expect to officially visit in June. And we'll see if Atkinson's on the 6th and Cooper's a midweek. But my point is, it's going to be over 50 official visitors. And outside of your specialists, who those guys are always going to be ranked the lowest 3-star recruit, there's never been this depth of talent coming in across the board. And you just look at the edge and D-line positions, I think there's 16 official visitors. All of them are national recruits. There's not a single one that's not a national recruit. So that's kind of a reflection of where Texas is at. Offensive line is just ridiculous. I mean, they're all – Malachi Lee in Hawaii, Stacey Searles flies twice from Athens to Honolulu. I mean, that guy's really good if you're getting on a bird and flying to Honolulu from Athens, right? And Kyle Flood and Nansen went out there. You're not doing that for a guy that's a good offensive lineman. You're doing that for a guy that you think potentially may be a great player. And he just doesn't – he's not on social media, didn't even put together a junior highlight tape. So a lot of people haven't really seen him. The depth of talent's just off the charts in this class. And I think Texas will add another running back to the OV list. But I think the talent's off the chart. Texas is going to sign another top 5 class. The interesting thing to me is how the dominoes are going to fall and how that's going to affect how this class looks come August versus kind of what people put on paper now. Because all the guys that we put on paper now that are the Texas lean here, Texas lean there, Texas isn't going to get all those guys. One, there are things that are going to happen in June. But two, just look at offensive line. There may be 4 or 5 guys that you could argue are kind of Texas leans right now. They all can't be in the class. So somebody, when the dominoes start falling, are not going to feel like Texas is the best spot for them versus somewhere else. That's going to happen in this class. But I think recruiting, Texas is a cool school. Again, they have a lot of cachet with kids, whether it was CJ in Louisiana, me in Florida, Georgia. In May, Texas is a school that kids want to come see. They want to visit, and it's not just token visits. There's been times where it's been token visits. This isn't token visit scenario. Texas is going to have a tremendous class, and we'll see where it all goes. And it's honestly, it's hard to predict because, one, the NIL factor and what's going to happen in June and July leading into decisions, and two, there's so many out-of-state prospects. And I mean, there's more out-of-state official visitors than there are in-state. So on some level, we have to see how this plays out at certain positions because I'm here to tell you, going into May, I don't think Texas had their board set at a lot of positions. That's what May is for, is to continue to evaluate these kids one last time, offers were made in May, and continue to see where the discussions go with the families and the circles of these players. On 27 quarterback recruiting, CJ, it'll be interesting to see if anybody outside of Pton Houston and Malachi Ziegler, the 2 Louisiana quarterbacks, because Ziegler has not been offered. It'll be interesting to see who gets offered this weekend, if anybody gets offered. And here's the one thing I'll leave to CJ with. If Texas doesn't offer a quarterback this weekend, then Pton Houston's their guy because he's the only one that has an offer.
Yeah, that's we've seen it over the last few years. June is kind of that time in which Texas makes the move for the quarterback of the next class. Right now, as you mentioned, Gerry, only Pton Houston has an offer from Texas. But you're bringing in Malachi Ziegler, you're bringing in Jerry Meyer III, who Texas stopped by to see twice in Waxahachie. Do they make a move there? We'll see. But right now, no guarantee that they will. And the kind of that one constant at the moment is Pton Houston's been to Texas plenty, and he holds that Texas offer. So we'll see. Of course, that's one of the big storylines to come out of this June 1st camp weekend.
And Bobby, we know that, and the reason why I kind of set that up, we know AJ Milwie went look at some 27 quarterbacks in May. Now, who they actually bring in is the key, right? I mean, you could say, oh, AJ Milwie went and looked at nine quarterbacks. It doesn't matter unless they bring them to campus. That's just part of the evaluation process. Who comes to campus either this on Sunday or June 5th is really going to tell the story here. It's hard for me to believe that CJ and I won't be covering at least one more quarterback in this class other than Pton Houston and Malachi Ziegler.
Got it. Maybe Jerry Meyer, third out of Waxahachie, like CJ mentioned. But I will say this. It seems to me, Jerry, you made the point early. There are more out-of-state visitors than there are in-state, and it's just continually start broadening and the recruiting department broadening the scope of Texas's horizons to incorporate not just California and maybe spot recruiting the Southeast, but really going all in the Southeast region as well. All right, let's talk a little bit about where I'm at here in Destin, Florida right now. A couple of big topics to discuss and put out there. Obviously, as of right now, as we're taping this, we're still awaiting the House settlement. So let's put that on the back burner because we don't know if it's going to get approved or not. Some things that are being discussed in Destin right now is the future of the college football playoff, the future conference scheduling of games, the postseason games in the SEC are all possibilities right now. So let's start with this. The SEC wants to move to a 9-game conference schedule. Right now, it's an 8-game conference schedule. Texas plays 8 conference games. Okay. I asked Steve Sarkisian yesterday, does he want 9 games? He goes, look, I'm fine with 9 games. We'll play whatever. But what you got to realize is if we play 9 games in the SEC, that means there's going to be 8 more losses among SEC teams when we're looking at the college football playoff. Okay? Is point blank what he said. And what he means by that is if we're moving to a 16-team college football playoff, he and the SEC coaches and the SEC administrators want to make sure by playing that one more tough opponent that they're not, cutting off their nose to spite their face and losing a spot in the college football playoffs. That's why Commissioner Greg Sankey, along with the Big Ten Commissioner Tony Petitti, have asked for a 4-4-2-2-1 model for college football playoffs. That's why. Otherwise, if you want to be honest, they could just keep the 8-game schedule and go 5 automatic qualifiers, which are the 4 major conferences and 1 non-major conference winner or, person, and then have 11 spots come in. Those 11 spots, more often than not, would create 5 total spots for the SEC. Over the last 10 years, the SEC would average more than 5 spots in those top 16. Last year, the SEC would add 6 of those top 16s probably. So I'm saying all of this to give you a sense of what is contingent upon it. So if they're not able to work something out with the college football playoff, they're going to keep the SEC at 8 games conference schedule. That is not what Texas Athletic Director Chris Del Conte wants. He wants a 9-game schedule because Texas currently loses 1 home game every other year to the Oklahoma matchup in Dallas. Now, there's no talk about moving that game out of Dallas. Don't get me wrong, for any purpose whatsoever. But it's important to note that that's what Texas wants. And the holdup may be the college football playoff. Until they get the college football playoff, they can't figure out a 9-game SEC schedule. They can't figure out an interconference play with the Big Ten that they're talking about and proposing, and they can't have a conference play-in game as well. So until the college football playoff gets settled, the 9-game conference schedule, the play-in games, all of these other machinations that people are talking about, it's just not going to happen from an SEC perspective, in my opinion. Got Gerry or CJ, either of you guys have questions about that or thoughts?
Look, I've been pretty vocal about wanting a 9-game schedule for the SEC, and I know that, look, the SEC is a gauntlet. We've talked about it. Most draft picks, a lot of talent, et cetera. It's going to be tough to determine what a 3-loss SEC team going through 3 losses in the SEC might look like versus other teams in other schedules. But look, Big 12 plays 9 games. The Big 10 plays 9 games. Why should the SEC be exempt from that? And again, I mentioned the talent. I get that. But you look at SEC's record versus other conferences in last 2 years specifically, it's not like they're overwhelmingly defeating other conference teams, right? They're 20-15 in regular season out-of-conference matchups against the P4. That's not overwhelmingly successful. They're about 500, really, 13-11 in bowl games as well. That includes the playoff, in which a Big Ten champion has been crowned in each of the last 2 seasons. So right now, I think that the SEC is coming back down to earth again in terms of competitive football nature. And I think that the SEC, again, has the most talent, but that doesn't always equate to the best football team. Look at Texas A&M. Look at what Arizona State did last year in terms of their NFL talent on the field and how competitive they were in these big games all the way down the stretch and what were most must-win games for them for basically the last 8 weeks of the season. So I think 9 games is my favorite path. I think it's the way that the SEC should approach it. And if they can come to terms with some sort of automatic qualifier that, kind of provides the safety net for the SEC in terms of representation in the college football playoff, I'm there. I'm with it. I like it. But it's all about whether or not they eventually get to the 9-game model.
Yeah, you can't be scared, CJ, to your point about doing it. I would just challenge one thing. The difference between the SEC and the Big Ten or any other conference is not necessarily at the very top. Okay, it's not Texas versus Ohio State or Georgia versus Michigan or, Alabama versus Penn State. The last 10 years, that conference has been extraordinarily top-heavy, right? The SEC has not been as top-heavy other than just Alabama and then just Georgia, right? The strength of the SEC is really teams 4 through 10, as opposed to the strength of the Big Ten has always been 1 through 3. And that's where Steve Sarkisian, and where they're deciding these teams that are 4, 5, and 6 that could go into the playoffs are in those numbers 4 through 8 or 4 through 10 in the SEC compared to the Big Ten. And so the top heaviness of the Big Ten in 9 games, or just the overall play of the Big 12, generally speaking, and their lack of success in post-conference. Same with the ACC outside of Clemson. I think that's where the coaches come back and say, wait a minute, this league is a little different and needs to be treated a little differently. As well as, it goes beyond the point of even talking about the popularity of the teams in the league as well. Gerry?
Yeah, so I think, look, I think Greg Sankey was negotiating for more TV money in front of the mic in a lot of ways. All right, if we're going to 9 games, then what's that number going to look like, ESPN? Because we know your starting number, but let's get to the nuts and bolts of this. And if we're not going to have an SEC championship game and we essentially have 2 play-in games, what's that monetary figure going to look like? Because it's got to be worth it. The SEC has all the leverage because they have the highest viewership. So they're like, hey, we'll do it, but there's a negotiation that's going to take place here too. And that part of that negotiation is the playoff as well, the 16-team playoff. And what that looks like. And one of the things I'm for, the more I've thought about this, I would say this. And I don't think it'll happen because there's too much money in the SEC teams playing each other But instead of SEC's 3, 6, 4, 5, or whatever that's going to be playing for essentially a play-in spot in the playoff game or in the playoffs, I would have ACC number 2 play SEC number 3. And let's see where the chips fall. All right, Big 12, all right, ACC. If y'all think y'all are worthy of 3 teams, let's have playing games essentially before we get to 16. Because here's the thing about the bowl games that's different. Like to CJ's point, the point he was talking about. Here's the thing that's different in bowl games now. For me, a lot of times the best players don't play if it's not meaningful. So Illinois beat South Carolina last year, but Rocket Sanders doesn't play in that game, right? It's like the edge Kennard didn't play in that game. So what does that game really tell us? It doesn't tell us as much. But what if everything's on the line?
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I think that it is a posturing for money at some level, but it's an open one. I mean, there's going to be more money if you play 9 conference games. There's going to be more money if you play-in games. There's going to be more money if you have 16 teams in the college football playoff. All of that will mean more money. So it's an open posturing. I don't think it's hidden. I would just say that the Big 12 and the ACC they could care less if the SEC and the Big 10 play 9 games. They just want more money for themselves.
Right. They want the SEC to lose more games and the Big 10 to lose more games because that gives them a better chance to have an extra seat at the table in the playoffs.
Yes.
That's why I think if I'm the Big 10 and SEC, I'm going to say, all right, then we'll just play y'all for playing games. How's that sound? Then they won't want any part of that. They won't want to do that.
Yeah.
They'll be like, no. We don't want to do that.
I agree with that. One of the things I've thought about is why not have like they're talking about an interconference or interconference rivalry between the Big 10 and the SEC. Why not, instead of playing San Jose State, not and just as an example this year,
Texas,
why not every other year play a team from the Big 12 and then another year play somebody from the ACC? You do that and you get more data. The one things that I will come back to just to finish this discussion, because we could go on all day about it. The SEC and the coaches are looking. They don't like the committee deciding who the teams are, because the committee has all these variety of. They're not necessarily football people. You had Condoleezza Rice on the deciding of who goes into the college football playoffs. Not in no disrespect to her. She's just not a college football person first and foremost, right? She's a geopolitician. That's her expertise. I think that what I would say to this and what the SEC coaches said is I want something that is more analytic driven, deciding how we choose these teams. And they do it in basketball. Now, granted, there's more teams, but they adhere pretty closely to the RPI in basketball, right? What are things that they can do for football that can be similarly situated? And then it becomes less of a beauty contest over who is 10-1 or 11-1, but played nobody, like Indiana,
right,
and lost one of the 2 games that they played that were somebody, versus a 9-3 Ole Miss team that beat Georgia, that beat Alabama, right? Yeah. I mean, and so I don't know the answer. I'm not.
Well, so CJ, your thoughts on this? So where I think it's an interesting discussion is the ACC Big 12. So last year, let's think about what there were 2 ACC teams and 1 Big 12 team in the playoff, right? So here's where the SEC and the Big 10 are always going to win the argument for me. And CJ may have a different point of view, and this is what makes these shows fun. Clemson got dotted by Texas. SMU got smoked by Penn State, right? Arizona State gave Texas a fight. They had a month to prepare for that game. But like for the ACC, the Big 12 say, we want 2 guaranteed spots. Why? Your 2 ACC teams weren't didn't really have a chance in the games they played. That's going to be the SEC and Big Ten's argument. I'm interested to see where all this goes.
The one thing with automatic qualifiers for me is I feel like they should only be given to teams that participate in conference championship games, and that could be another conversation of whether or not they keep them or not. But that's a whole nother game with high stakes that you have to play. That should be your golden ticket to, hey, you're a playoff team. We know that you're one of the top two at the very least, because you can get into the conversation. Tennessee had a great record in the SEC last year. They get smacked by their first round opponent, right? It's all the same thing. Oregon, same thing. And I know that they ran into a red hot Ohio State team, but point being, you could have looked at the end of year results for these teams in the playoff and say, hey, because they got blown out, they shouldn't have been there. Body of work in a big-time conference like Indiana, what could be in Illinois this year, we're moving the goalposts as a result of what I believe was a poor result at the end of the season. Who knows what happens if an Indiana faces an Arizona State, or they face an SMU, or they go out and they face, a team that's not Notre Dame. Things could have been significantly closer, and now we're looking at a team that was deserving at the end of the year. So that automatic qualifiers are always going to be sticky because SEC is going to fight for everybody that they want, Big Ten as well. But until you're a team that is fighting for a conference championship, for me, hey, you're the same as everybody else in the country that's not fighting for that conference championship.
I think that's fair. And I want to say this. Greg Sankey mentioned it on Tuesday. He said, look, why do we don't have to change the college football playoff. We changed the seating, and so we don't have to add teams. Of course, everybody wants to because it makes more money, but we don't have to. He said, look, last year, the college football playoff worked. Yep. Now, the SEC only got 3 teams in, probably thinks they should have had 4. So be it. Said it still worked. The best team won the national championship. It was a great viewing experience. The numbers looked great, etc. He goes, I don't get the idea that we just have to change everything. And then all of a sudden, people want more piece of the pie at the table. So anyway, all right, that's going to do it for today's On Texas Football. Thanks again to Adam Lowy and his group over at the Lowy Law Firm. Thank you also to CJ Vogel and Gerry Hamilton for hanging out with me for a little bit here. Until next time, you guys have a good one. Hook 'em horns.